we are on remote, be keenly aware that even though we are on remote, that things are still working for the School of Environment. Great things are happening every day. I'm telling you. In the core laboratory, for example, Raj is my go-to person. We have a scanning electron microscope, right, Jazz? Right, Raj, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we've been working exceedingly very hard. Our core lab is heavily so equipped, major instrumentation. We're changing we are working on the autoclave, bringing new autoclave in place. There's a lot your dean is doing, a lot, I'm telling you, students. So I'm excited about you doing your part, making sure you are meeting with your supervisors, your committee members, making sure they know what you're working with. You are the driver of your work, right? Right?
Yep.
You are the driver of your work. You're pushing us to do what we need to be doing. Of course, we know what we need to be doing, but you got to be pushing that. So I look forward to all of you who are slated to be graduating this semester. There are students who are also slated to be graduating in spring of 2021. For those students for 2021, you should be in the middle of wrapping up, writing up, finish up experiments. You know, you still have 1 semester to do it. I would say how happy I am every time I have this window to express my excitement about all of you. I know all of you. Of course, you know me. Before this COVID, Bobby and I went on Spring Creek on a boat ride. It was an enjoyable trip. I can't forget
time.
Bobby. There's no way we can forget it. Those experiences that you know your dean is part of all the time, and we're doing great things through all of our research. There's a lot going on, my students. Just got new funding just today, new funding for 3 more PhDs to our program. You know, and not too long ago, I talked about the funding that we got for 24 undergraduates. So you can see all what your dean is doing. I say this to you, there's no way I can be doing this if not because you motivated me. There's no way. You should know me by now that my excitement comes from you exciting me, pushing me, doing everything we can. And so thank you for being the best that we can always expect from you, and do your own part in advancing your graduate efforts. Of course, you know how to get to me. Please email me whatever issues. You know I will respond. You should know by now that whenever you set me up for something, I'll do my best to respond to it. So thank you everyone again. And I hope the semester continues to go well with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Privacy.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. I'm glad you came back, Christy.
I know. It's like, oh my God. I'm back, yay!
I'll tell you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bansi. I really appreciate it. Michelle, are you in here? I saw that you popped back up. Are you good?
Yep, I'm back. Unfortunately, I'm having trouble finding my PowerPoint now that I'm on my personal computer, but I can definitely still talk about things if that sounds good.
Yeah. I don't know if it's on my end, but your volume is also a little bit low. Okay. For those of you just joining us, Michelle's had some technical issues this morning that she's working through, but she still managed to come in and be a part of the presentation, which I believe is going to be a really great one. Give me a second here, and I found you.
Okay. Does this sound any better? I took my headphones off.
Yeah, much better. Thank you. And just quick housekeeping as usual. Just make sure you put your microphones on mute. Michelle Graulty will alert you how you can participate. So just follow those directions. If she wants you to put questions, you can put questions in the comment box if you'd like. or width at the end. It's just going to be at her discretion. Just be aware of your surroundings. We don't want to interrupt if it's not needed. Again, thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to turn it over to Miss Ivory Council, who's going to do the introduction, and turn it over to Miss Graulty. Thank you again for coming. Really, really appreciate it. And we've had some great sessions so far and an awesome turnout and great participation. We're going to keep it going. As I said, we have a full house. We're booked in seminars throughout the rest of the semester. So thank you guys so much. It's really because of you and your participation that now I have people lined up wanting to present to you guys. So thanks again. Ivory, I turn it over to you.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Michelle Graulty. She's the Awareness and Appreciation Project Coordinator for the Coral Reef Conservation Program with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection. Michelle Graulty originally hails from Maryland. Whoop, Maryland! And she attended the University of Maryland in College Park, where she obtained a BS in Environmental Science and Policy. She studied abroad at the University of Queensland in Australia for a year, where she dove on the Great Barrier Reef for the first time and cemented her love of coral reefs. She continued the coral course at the University of Miami, where she earned a master's in marine conservation and focused on coral reef ecology and international ocean law. She interned with the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy and spent time in DC with the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and Ocean Conservancy. She happily flew down south to take on her current role with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Coral Reef Conservation Program. She manages the outreach and education related projects and also serves as the communications liaison for the Southeast region of DEP's Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection. Please join me in extending a warm SOE welcome to Michelle Graulty.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. All right, great. Hopefully you can hear me. So Siddiqui said it's been quite a day. We found out this morning at about 8:30 that our power would be out for the rest of the day. So lesson learned, leave your computer on the charger during these times. So my computer battery, my work computer battery died. So now I'm on my personal, but the pro is that I can leave my video on at least and see you all. The downside is I don't have my slides, but I can still talk through what I was going to talk through and kind of, I think, just use our DEP website as a guide for all of you. So I think, Siddiqui, you said that I could share my screen. Is that correct?
Yes, you should be good.
Okay, that's good to know. So let's try doing this. So, as I said, I work for the state's Coral Reef Conservation Program. So your school is based in Tallahassee, which is where our headquarters is, but I am actually in the Miami office. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see, share. Oh, great. Okay. Share. There we go. All right. So I work for the DEP Coral Reef Conservation Program. So Florida's coral reef, let's find the ECA page, is over 350 miles long. So everything that you see that's hot pink here is coral reef. So 350 miles is the same as driving from Miami to Jacksonville. So how many of you have done that drive before? It's quite long. So it stretches out past Key West here at the bottom here, all the way out to the dry Tortugas. And as you can see on this box here, we've got some different management entities involved here. So up in this bright blue box, that represents the Southeast Florida Coral Reef Ecosystem Conservation Area, which the Coral Program manages. And then the bright green here is Biscayne National Park, which was the nation's first underwater national park. And I think it might still be the only majority underwater national park. And then this big yellow rectangle down here is Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, which is co-managed by NOAA and us, the Department of Environmental Protection. So the Coral Program focuses on this northern third up here, but then we also have some folks in our office who focus on the co-management of the sanctuary. So Florida's coral reef is a super diverse area, but we don't have Nemo and some other creatures that you might have seen in Finding Nemo, but we do have 43 species of stony or reef building corals on our reef. And 7 of those are listed as endangered species. So they're listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And some of them, I bet we could just, let's see, Google them here. I can show them to you guys. Let's see, move this toolbar here. Yeah, that's all right. Anywho, so some of which are endangered on the Endangered Species Act. And what makes Florida's coral reef really unique about, or makes it stand out compared to other reef systems in the world, is that it's super close to a densely populated and very urbanized area. So these 5 counties here, these 5 counties here are home to over 6.3 million people, but we get 38 million visitors annually, which is the same as the population of California. But in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef is about a 2-hour boat ride offshore in some places. But here in Broward County at Lauderdale by the Sea, the reef is so close that you can snorkel out to it from the coastline. So as you can imagine, a lot of the things that we do on land can therefore impact the reef a lot more quickly and a lot more intensely than some other reef regions in the world. So the Coral Reef Conservation Program was created in 2004 underneath the bigger umbrella of DEP. And we decided to focus at the time on 4 key threats to the reef. So those are these 4. Oh, there we go, over here. So my job is focusing on the lack of awareness and appreciation for reef resources. We have so many people here, both in South Florida and beyond Florida, who don't even realize that we have a reef or think that corals are only in the Keys when they really extend much further north. And then we also focus on the threats of incompatible fishing and diving and other uses. So more of those extractive activities too. And then we focus on land-based sources of pollution. So as you can see, Lake Okeechobee is right here. So we've got a lot of issues with water flowing from Lake O and just from these urban areas as well, with all the polluted stormwater runoff and outfalls, as you can imagine. And then we also focus on the maritime industry and coastal construction impact. So how can we be more proactive with our permitting processes and things like that to make sure that we're protecting those coastal resources? And then in, I want to say it was 2015, we added a 5th focus area for another threat to the reef, and that is reef resilience. So that kind of encompasses reef restoration and things like that as well. So I'll go through these and I can kind of click through these for you guys. So as I mentioned, I focus on awareness and appreciation. So that's all of the education and outreach related activities. So we have a traveling teacher trunk program that we operate in the 4 counties that border that coral ECA, so Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and Martin. And we send a trunk filled with lesson plans and coral reef models and books and DVDs to teachers in grades K through 12 for them to use with their classrooms. And then we also do video PSAs as well, so I can send you guys the link to some of those for you to check out afterwards, and different communication projects as well. And here's fishing and diving and other uses. So one of the big things that we focus on is how our fishers and divers using the area, what areas are having a lot of anchor damage and things like that. And they also do reef monitoring. Land-based sources of pollution. So one of my favorite pieces that we have is our fertilizer and pesticide brochure. So I'll go ahead and click to that for you all to see. And we have this in English and Spanish. And we've got printed copies, so if you guys are curious. So you can imagine when it's in your hands, it looks much neater folded up. But it explains why using fertilizers and pesticides in an appropriate manner can help improve our water quality and therefore the quality of life out on the reef. So we partnered with Florida Sea Grant and the, what's it called? It's the University of Florida IFAS, but it's an extension program that they have to run the Florida Friendly Yards and Florida Friendly Native Plant Program. So has anybody here heard of a Florida Friendly Yard? You can raise your hand. all about planting native Florida plants, which is pretty neat. They have so many great resources online that you can check out. So let me know if you've ever got questions about that. Go on back here. And then, like I said, with the maritime industry and coastal construction impacts, this coordinator focuses a lot on our issues with ports, so especially Port Everglades and Port of Miami. And if there are ever any corals in those areas that are going to be endangered by a port expansion or something like that, that's what this coordinator focuses on. And then reef resilience is our restoration area. So the reef resilience focus area, like I said earlier, is pretty new, but they focus on two really neat programs, which I like, which are our citizen science programs. So our citizen science program, our big one, is called the Southeast Florida Action Network. So this is all about being our eyes and ears out on the water. So essentially, if anyone ever sees a marine incident, any type of thing, it can be discolored water, a fish kill, you see some coral bleaching, etc., give us a call or fill out the survey online, and then we can coordinate the appropriate response, either through FWC, perhaps it's us, perhaps it's NOAA, and get that covered. So in our office, we have about, I think it's 8 people in the Coral Reef Conservation Program, and we're divided in the Miami office, and we have an office in West Palm Beach. So as you can imagine, it's tough to manage 105 miles of reef when there aren't that many of us. So this is something that we encourage boaters and fishers and divers and beachgoers, anyone who's out on the water can be a part of CFAN. And within CFAN, we have a neat program called Bleach Watch. Has anyone here ever heard of Bleach Watch, perhaps, if you're familiar with corals? They have a program down in the Florida Keys. So Bleach Watch is all about keeping your eyes out for coral bleaching out on the reefs. So with climate change and increasing sea surface temperatures and ocean acidification, coral bleaching becomes a bigger and bigger threat for us. So corals are animals, which is funny because they really just look like rocks, but they're animals that photosynthesize. They've got these algae living inside their tissues in symbiosis with them, and the algae are actually what give the coral most of its nutrients. You can imagine as a stationary animal out on the reef, it's hard to catch food as a filter feeder. So corals really prefer to photosynthesize. But the algae and the corals have a super fragile relationship. So whenever these algae get stressed, if the water's really hot, or even if the water's really cold or there's pollution, the algae will leave the coral's tissue. And the tissue is naturally translucent. The algae are what give it the color. So when they leave the coral tissue, that's when you can see through the tissue to the coral skeleton, and it gives off that bleached white color. So there's your little bleaching summary. So we train observers, snorkelers, and divers to go out on the reef and submit Bleach Watch reports. So they record coral conditions for us and let us know what's out there. And we also even started a Train the Trainer program, which is really fun, to just help grow it even more. So if you are ever snorkeling or scuba diving here in Southeast Florida and you want to be a part of our Bleach Watch Observer Network, you definitely can. And in the bleaching months, so in summer and early fall, we send out current conditions reports. We're drafting our end of September report right now, and we send these out to our Bleach Watch Observer Network with different maps and things of how the water temperatures are looking, so we can give them a better idea of where to look and where to check out issues. Let's see. And then another really neat program I want to share with you guys before I go more into some other topics is our Reef Injury Prevention and Response Program. So I'm sure in your classes, you're probably familiar with the mantra that in environmental science and in environmental management, often what we lack is money and enforcement, right? It's like, okay, we've got these great environmental laws, but do they have any teeth? Do we have any enforcing power? And if we do have enforcing power, do we have the money to pay the people to go and enforce these issues? One of my favorite aspects of our program is this Reef Injury Prevention and Response Program. So in 2009, I'll scroll down here, the Florida legislature passed the Coral Reef Protection Act, which made it illegal to injure corals in state waters. So let's see, if you guys want to unmute yourself, does anyone here know the nautical mileage for state waters versus beyond? Has anyone learned about the territorial sea? So the territorial sea begins 3 nautical miles off. So 3 miles in and to the high tide line, those are Florida state waters. So the state can decide what happens there. But beyond, then it has federal control out to, I think it's 200 nautical miles. And then it becomes the high seas, basically, where there's no defined rules. So under the Coral Reef Protection Act, it's illegal to anchor on corals and damage them. So with our Reef Injury Prevention and Response Program, all vessels that are over 60 to 80 feet are required, and this is just maritime law, are required to have GPS trackers on them. And so we've got the hard bottom and reef community mapped here in South Florida, and this is available to mariners and anyone of the public as well. And so our system gets pinged whenever one of those large vessels is hovering over a reef area for more than 15 minutes, because then we can assume that it's pretty likely that they probably dropped anchor there instead of just passing through. So in Florida, our reef kind of has 3 different reef lines, 1, 2, and 3, and then we've got sandy channels in between. So along our coastal ports on maritime maps, we have special anchorage maps outlined for captains. So they're supposed to anchor in the sandy spots. So when we get a ping that it's possible they anchored over a reef, we're able to triangulate that in our GPS system, and then we go out on boats with our scuba diving gear, and we drop down with GoPros and waterproof paper, and we write down and take photos of what we see. So you can see here on the right this picture of an orange barrel sponge, and it's got big white gash at the top here. And with the coral on the left here as well, you can see some gashes too. And this is from anchor damage. So it's exposing that white tissue, and you can see that it's broken. And so when we go down there, if we see any damage, we record it, we do a survey, and we're able to calculate the amount of money that would be required to restore that area. And then we're able to go after those vessels and assess civil penalties, so that we can have money to restore those areas. So that, I'd say, is probably one of my favorite parts of this program that I had no idea existed before I joined the Department of Environmental Protection. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got the whole reef mapped. So if you're ever curious, you can download this app on your phone and see where it is. So I like using this when I want to go snorkeling here in South Florida. Like I mentioned, Lauderdale by the Sea, you can just swim out to it from the shore. So it's really easy to find reef areas. And then I can send these fun links to you guys too. We've also got PSAs encouraging folks to use mooring buoys. And we have a waterproof mooring buoy guide as well for the 4 counties that border the reef too. So always encouraging captains either to anchor in sand or to tie up to established mooring balls so that they don't risk dropping anchor on the reef. So that's a pretty quick overview of our program here. So lastly, since I know many of you are college students, I just wanted to talk a bit more about my experience and how I kind of got to where I am and some different thought processes that went into that. So that way, if you guys have any questions for me, you're more than welcome. So as I said earlier, I went to the University of Miami for grad school. So that's how I got exposed to coral reefs down here and all of that. But when I graduated, I moved back home to the Maryland area, and I did some internships in Washington, D.C. in the nonprofit world. And in college, that was something that I wasn't really familiar with, at least the environmental nonprofit world. I had never really thought of that as a job opportunity. And so I really enjoyed those internships. And what I liked the most about the nonprofit world is it's very mission focused, right? So nonprofits are created because they want to solve or help one particular problem, right? So everything that you do in that line of work is devoted to that one problem or issue. So if you find an issue that you're really passionate about, it can be a really good match. So one of the internships I did was with the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. like I said, Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary is one of those 13. So all the work that we did focused on the 13 national marine sanctuaries. And I really liked having kind of that narrow view of different ecosystems. But again, those 13 are spread out throughout the states and territories. So it was neat having a national reach, but a narrow focus, even though those two things seem like they don't quite go together. And then I found this job back in Miami, and now back in the government world. It's very different because everything that we do in Miami, you know, are things that are mandated by Tallahassee, right? So carrying out the Coral Reef Protection Act and things like that. And sometimes our Coral Reef Conservation Program goals can be different from what Tallahassee goals and priorities are. So learning how to match those and things like that. But it's really exciting because a lot of the work that we do with our partners in South Florida can be amplified because we have this statewide reach. So we recently launched in January, I can pull it up for you all, a Florida's Coral Reef awareness campaign. So who watched the Super Bowl in Miami this past year? Awesome. If you didn't, no worries, of course. So the week leading up to the Super Bowl, they had, what was it called? It's called Super Bowl Live, which is the fan fest that they do in any city that they host a Super Bowl in. And so we had a Florida's Coral Reef booth at the fan fest, which was in downtown Miami. And we were able to share with folks all of the different fun facts and kind of calls to action that we have. And I'll scroll down to one of my favorite videos on here. So this right here is called the Coral City Camera. And it is a 24/7 live stream from a coral reef that's right in the port of Miami. So it's always fun to see what creatures are going to swim by. I've seen manatees, sharks, funny fish interactions, and so forth swimming by. So that's
Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Can you hear me? Was this the camera? That's what you used for the picture we used for the flyer?
No, that was a different picture.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is really neat. Oh, there we go. We see some fish coming in now. So this is definitely a really neat website for you all to check out. And so, like I said, one of the neat things about working for the state government is that you can have this really wide reach. And so now this campaign has become a big focus of the department as a whole, and something that the governor came down to Miami and announced back in January, and something that our DEP secretary has really been pushing, which is really exciting. So sans PowerPoint, that's all I've got for you today, but I'm happy to answer any coral reef questions in general, or if you have any questions about working for a state agency or so forth, or anything like that, the floor is open.
I'll start. What do you think are the, do you guys have any projections of what the reef will look like in terms of like your planning? What are you guys forecasting right now for 10, 20 years with preventive measures, or if you don't have any?
Yeah.
If the preventive measures don't work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so something that I'll pull up, let's see. Let me go back to that website. So over the last 30 years, Florida has lost a significant amount of coral cover. And then back in 2014, we saw a strange disease appear right offshore of Miami-Dade County. And usually this is a GIF that'll run, but I see it's not quite running now. But since then, the disease has spread throughout the entire reef tract and all the way down. Right now, the only place it isn't is the dry Tortugas. And it affects, as you can see here, nearly half of our stony coral species. And unlike a coral getting sick and then getting better, this disease usually results in 100% mortality. So we have seen massive coral die-offs in the last 5 years that we really weren't expecting. And so that has launched a huge coordinated response effort that's led by DEP, NOAA, the National Park Service, and FWC. And so now in Southeast Florida, we're thinking a lot more about restoration. Prior to this, restoration had really only been happening in the Florida Keys, but now that Reef Resilience Coordinator I mentioned is focusing on restoration, and we've got a big outplanting trial planned for the Southeast Florida area that we're that we'll be launching this year and in the beginning of 2021. So I think the future composition of the reef is going to look really different, and there's going to be a huge push towards coral propagation on land in aquariums and land-based nurseries, and then nurseries in the ocean as well, and outplanting that onto the reef.
I have a question about ocean acidification. Are you seeing the corals softening in their structure or dissolving in their structure?
Not yet. So biologically, that is what's going to happen. So the growing rate in coral, we call it the accretion rate, is definitely slowing. But an interesting thing we're noticing with Florida, the way that the continental plates are, is Florida is actually sinking a little bit. So ocean acidification is a much more long-term process. So right now in Florida, we are more worried about the rate of the land sinking and the ocean floor sinking faster than the coral skeletons dissolving. So as that land continues to sink and sink, we're worried that the coral's not going to be able to grow fast enough to keep up and continue to get all that sunlight that they need for the algae and photosynthesis.
Would they go shallower then? You know, like a creek just move.
Yeah, so that's something that some people have hypothesized, that maybe the corals will move northward as the ocean waters warm. But with sunlight, corals need a high amount of sunlight. So some different modeling have shown that it's really unlikely that corals would migrate north of the Florida border if they were even to migrate, you know, all the way up to Jacksonville, if the water really were to get that hot, because it still wouldn't meet the same sunlight requirements that they need. But what we are curious to see is if coral, something that they're experimenting right now is transplanting corals from Cuba and the Bahamas area a little bit further north. So those corals who are even closer to the equator and more accustomed to hot water temperatures, if we can move them a bit further away from the equator, but still in the general coral reef range, and see if those more heat tolerant corals can thrive in these waters that are starting to warm.
I was thinking of shallower, like more toward the beach, let's say.
Yeah. So the issue, so corals don't like to be too shallow, because if they're in a super tidal area, it can be difficult. They risk drying out, and if it's too wavy as well, they risk being broken.
Michelle, Donald Axelrod here, FAMU. What about the nutrient problem? Is that in check now? You got stormwater runoff. You got, I believe the sewage treatment outfall at Key West is now deep injection well, and have cesspits and septic tanks and shallow injection wells been eliminated for deep injection well disposal?
Yeah, so I must say I'm not sure about Key West, but the outfalls are certainly something that we are monitoring closely. I believe there are 5 active outfalls now in South Florida. So we have long-term water quality monitoring in place. We monitor, I think it's 27 different sites along the reef monthly, and we monitor for, I think, at least 9 different parameters. So one of our components, you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here, I'll highlight it, and I can click to it too, is the Southeast Florida Coral Reef Initiative Technical Advisory Committee. And this was born out of folks strictly focusing on water quality. So here in Florida, we have 9 different inlet contributing areas. One is Government Cut, for example. We've got the Boynton Inlet. And different areas like that. And so our long-term goal is to create different watershed management plans for those 9 inlet contributing areas. And right now we've got a plan in place for the Boynton ICA, and we're working, I think our next step is going to be for Government Cut. When we did a watershed priority exercise, Boynton was the one that had the kind of the most issues and the most actionable solutions. And then Government Cut is the next one that we're going to be focusing on, hopefully with plans and funding. So water quality is definitely something that we talk about all the time.
Is water quality likely causative in this new coral reef disease, or do we know?
We're not sure yet. So let's see, I can click to that other page. We're not sure yet of the pathogen. We do know that it is waterborne and that it can also be passed along through touch. So if a coral in an aquarium is sick and has the disease and it touches another coral for a little bit of time, that other coral will become infected. Something that they're exploring right now is whether it's transported through ballast water. We're also trying to figure out, it's possible that we think that two pathogens could be at play too, maybe a bacteria and a fungus. And then we're also trying to see, we just had a call last week. What did we talk about? We're also curious if it could maybe have to do with pheromones as well. Something that's really interesting is the elkhorn coral and the staghorn coral, which are two of our iconic species and the two that grow really well for restoration because they grow so quickly. They are not susceptible to the disease, which is interesting. So we're doing a lot of like filtration research and things like that to see how small we can get down in particles and see what could be causing it.
Thank you.
Michelle, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier on that incompatible diving was something that your program monitors. Could you explain like what types of activities would be considered incompatible as far as diving is concerned?
Sure. Let's see if I can pull up our fun outreach product here. Let's see where it would be. So with diving, the issue is more so the way that people are diving. So you've got all that gear attached to you, right? And as some of your gauges are swinging around in the water column, they can hit the corals. And one of the biggest concerns is probably people swimming along, and instead of swimming parallel to the reef, they're swimming up and down like this and kicking the coral. So as you saw earlier, those scars on that coral from anchor damage, that can also come from people standing on and kicking the coral. So I'm gonna pull up here we go. We'll do the handheld briefing. So here's an outreach piece that has the different action items that we talk about with scuba divers. So maintaining proper buoyancy so that they're not kicking the reef, and then also not interrupting any animals that are on the reef, right? So not chasing any sea turtles or sharks to go and pet them. And making sure that when you're driving, when you're traveling out to the site too, you're not leaving any trash off board. And then something that we talk about too is sunscreen use. So we know that the nanoparticles in certain chemical sunscreens can have a negative effect on corals and lots of other marine organisms. So we're encouraging folks to use products, with zinc oxide, as well as wearing UPF clothing and things like that. So that's why in the summer, even though it's pretty hot, we still try to wear wetsuits when we're diving for sun protection and fire coral and other things that sting. Does that answer your question?
All right, is there any other questions? I am curious about the whole Florida is sinking thing, but I don't want to scare anyone. Do you have a little bit more? You can expand a little bit more on that? Or like, where are we right now? Like how soon are we going to see people coming up here?
So climate retreat.
or what region again? I'm sure you said it, but what region again is it? Are you seeing it?
Yeah, so I was referring more so to the areas of the ocean that are subsiding. So
Okay.
The seafloor and things like that, not necessarily communities, but there are a lot of different climate models that you can see where sea level rise will affect them. So in the city of Miami Beach, for example, when they have heavy rainfall, they have water actually coming up from the ground because it's so porous, right? With all the limestone here in Florida, our ground rock is essentially like Swiss cheese. So in Miami Beach, they actively pump water off of the land during heavy rainfalls and things like that. But it looks like a lot more people are going to be moving to Orlando, separate from DEP reports. That's just what I've seen, some different climate reports saying that folks.
I love Orlando.
Yeah, moving more inland. And I noticed even in Miami as well, there are different reports about climate gentrification
Okay.
property happening. So I don't know how familiar people are with the city of Miami landscape, but Little Haiti, for example, and what's the other neighborhood that's right next to it? Calle Ocho, for example, are a bit more inland and a bit more upland, and they're seeing property prices there are really starting to increase because the flooding whenever it rains in Brickell and other areas is starting to get pretty bad.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any more questions?
I do have a question. I have a question about how pollution, such as like plastics and styrofoams in the water, affect corals and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So with corals, the big issue is probably smothering. If you're thinking styrofoams and plastic bags and things like that, in terms of directly affecting the coral, it's going to be, let me see if I can pull up our marine debris program. There we go. It's going to be smothering and entanglement. So a lot of times when we dive down on the reef, we'll see, fishing line and things like that. So we try to cut that off, and fishing nets as well, ghost gear. There have been a few studies on corals to see if they're ingesting microplastics. And it looks like right now corals will ingest microplastic, this was only done on maybe 1 or 2 species, but in this study they found that the coral would ingest the microplastic, but then they'd spit it out. So they recognized that it was not food. Unlike seabirds that you'll hear about, for example, they'll eat the plastic and then 5 years later they die and you cut it open and they've got 30 pounds in there. So you won't find 30 pounds of plastic in a coral. But that's an issue there. And the issue I'd say more so is with the other animals that are on the reef, right? So corals are protected by the herbivores that are swimming around and eating all of the algae that can overgrow on the corals from things like an algae bloom and things like that. And so if those herbivores are ingesting plastic and thinking that they're full because they're eating, soda can bottles and things like that, then that'll become an issue if we start seeing decline in our herbivore population or our sea turtle population, and then they can't help kind of regulate the ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was asked, it was kind of a follow-up, because I know that some plastics and styrofoams, as they decay in the ocean, they kind of change the composition of like kind of like acidification. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of affects the sea life as well. And I'm not sure exactly what sciences are related to that, but how much would that affect it as well?
So let's see. I'm not familiar with any, in terms of coral reefs, I'm not familiar with any plastics changing water chemistry, but I am familiar with metals changing water chemistry. So that's something that we monitor closely with coastal construction activities. We noticed that with a project in Miami. There was a seawall, and I think, was it homes or buildings? There was some project going on above or behind the seawall. And so to mitigate the risk to those corals, we decided to remove them from the seawall and outplant them somewhere else. And when we were assessing those coral reefs' health, we did some water quality testing. We had them in aquariums, and we found that there were metals leaching into the water. Thankfully at that time, and this was pretty recent, like in the last 2 months, the coral's health, the coral condition was fine, but we did notice those metals leaching into the water. So that's definitely something to be mindful of. And like I said with bleaching earlier, if that relationship between the coral and the symbiotic algae can be stressed, perhaps by metals or altered ocean chemistry, then the algae could leave, which would not be good.
Thank you.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, Michelle, I can't thank you enough. Really do appreciate it. Guys, thank you so much for showing up and all your questions and participation. Really do appreciate it. I'll be in touch with everyone. There will be a survey coming out shortly. Give me today or Monday for it to come out. Please fill it out, as it does have a great impact on the seminars moving forward. Again, Michelle, I can't thank you. Can't thank you enough. I'll be in touch with you shortly just to get some feedback from you as well. But this was awesome, and really appreciate you still coming through, given what's going on. I know, They could have ended different, but I was glad that you came through, and we're here and support you as well. So thanks again, and everyone, thanks again for for a really great seminar. I'll be on the lookout for next week's information as well, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions for me. Does any of the students have any questions for me at this time, or you can
Michelle,
reach me?
drop her email. I would love to connect with her.
Yeah, here, I just put my email there. And like I said, if you guys have any, just career questions, college questions, Coral questions, please send them my way. I'm more than happy to speak with you. I'm so sorry I couldn't send the PowerPoint, but I'll pull up those fun videos and that Coral City camera. Like I said, it's live streamed. So if you ever just want to kind of sit and unwind to something pretty on your TV or your computer, it's really fun to look at. And I'll send you as well. They have a really neat Instagram account. They're always posting every day about a different species that they saw, and they do a little explanation about the behavior of the creature you might be seeing. So it's really neat.
Cool. And yeah, if you have an abbreviated version on a PDF you want to share, and I can share it with the students as well,
Yeah,
with the information in a follow-up email, I'd be happy to. So we'll touch base shortly. But thank you again so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for stopping by, and I'll see you next week.